Wanted to make sure you could see me over the flowers. So tonight we have invited our Kehillah High School students to join us for Shabbat services as they are about to embark on a long-awaited mission to Israel. They will be like pilgrims going on a spiritual quest to the land of our ancestors. And in that light, I thought it would be appropriate to give a sermon this evening about the importance of Israel in the formation of the Jewish people. You know, as we read in our Bible, Abraham, our ancestor, was called by God to leave his home behind and go to a place he had never seen before. And he trusted God's guidance, and of course, that's how we came to start our history in the land of Israel nearly 4,000 years ago. The rest of the Bible is full of references to Israel. Either we're living there or we go to Egypt for a while for food, then we become enslaved. But within the first few chapters of the book of Exodus, we're already on our way out of town and back to the land of Israel again. The book of Judges, Joshua, Samuel record the conquest of the land and the rule of the kings Saul and David. And then the book of Kings records the subsequent history in the land. And then we're conquered by the Babylonians about 2,600 years ago. But then we return to the land at the end of the biblical period with Ezra the scribe and Nehemiah and Zechariah as prophets of the return. But getting into any more detail than that would take a very long time. So the point is that without Israel, the Bible would be a very short book. Then I thought, well, let's talk about the Roman destruction of the temple and how our rabbis and sages composed these prayers that we still recite in our prayer books today in order to replace the worship service in the temple. These rabbis gave us structures to praise God as the creator of the universe, the one who inspired us to follow laws that create an ethical and compassionate society, the one who brought us out of slavery in Egypt and has always been with us in good times and bad. Now, the interesting thing about our prayer book for our Kehillah High School students going to Israel is that our sages were obsessed. They were obsessed about returning to our homeland and rebuilding a Jewish society there. They were so obsessed about it that in all these prayers that they created, they kept sticking in the idea of return and rebuilding in places where it didn't even belong. And I could point out a dozen such places in the prayer book this evening, but I only have 10 minutes. So if you're interested, come back and see me when you guys come back from Israel. The point is that Israel plays a crucial role in our prayers every single day. So then I looked at the itinerary that they're going on, and I was very excited to see that they're visiting two places in particular that highlight both the biblical connection and the prayer book connection to Israel. So I'm going to briefly talk about those two places. Now, before the Babylonian Empire conquered Israel, the major empire in the Fertile Crescent, what we sometimes call Mesopotamia, was the Assyrian Empire. And about 2,700 years ago, the Assyrian Empire tried to conquer the city of Jerusalem. But the king of Judea at that time was King Hezekiah, and he knew they were coming for him. So he fortified the city with an extra thick, huge, enormous, tall wall around the city. And he covered over the source of water, which was flowing from a spring on the side of the mountain that the city was built on. And he dug a tunnel to bring the water from that spring into the center of the city to fill an enormous pool. And that way the Assyrian Empire, the Assyrian army didn't have access to the water, but the city inside had plenty of water to survive, and that made laying siege to the city really, really difficult for those Assyrians. Now, the story is told very dramatically in the Bible, so I don't know if your tour guide is going to read from the Bible. My tour guide did, and it was great. I'm just going to share with you one thing. The Assyrian army general yells up to the city on the hill and speaks to them in Hebrew, the Assyrian general speaking in Hebrew, and he tells them all the terrible things that are going to happen to them if they don't give up. And the guards on the city wall that Hezekiah built yelled down at the Assyrian general, "Hey, stop talking in Hebrew. We understand Aramaic, which was the international language of the land, international language at the time. Speak to us in Aramaic, we'll understand, but you won't be terrifying the city people because they only speak Hebrew." And the general yells back at him, "Why do you think I'm talking in Hebrew?" I want to terrify them. Anyway, the next day, according to the Bible, the Assyrian siege of the city is gone, destroyed, just like that. The Jerusalemites wake up the next day and the siege is over. So Kehillah High School students, you are going to see with your own eyes that section of the broad wall that King Hezekiah built to fortify the city. And you will walk through the tunnel that King Hezekiah dug in order to bring the water into the land. Bring your water shoes, by the way. And I want you to think about when you walk through that tunnel and when you see that broad wall in the Jewish quarter, I want you to think about that story of the Assyrian assault on the city and remember how important that wall and that tunnel were. Because if they weren't there, we wouldn't be here today. Our city would have been destroyed by the Assyrian Empire, and world history would have been dramatically different because there wouldn't have been Christianity or Islam either, because they both came from us centuries later. So remember that when you look at that wall and travel through that tunnel. Now for something about our prayer book. Every Friday night, we sing Lecha Dodi. It's a song that greets the Sabbath bride. The idea for the song comes from a passage in the Talmud that says that one rabbi would get all dressed up at sunset on Friday evening, and he would welcome the Sabbath as a queen. And then another rabbi got all dressed up on Friday evening to welcome the Sabbath as a bride. And these two rabbis lived in Israel about 1,800 years ago. But the song that we sing today, Lecha Dodi, was written in the middle 1500s, centuries after these two rabbis from Israel were long gone. So who wrote Lecha Dodi? And why was it written? And what does this song have to do with your trip to Israel? I'm glad you asked. To answer these questions, I'm going to ask everyone to take out their prayer books and turn to page 23. Trust me, this will be fun. Now, one of the fun things that Hebrew poets used to do, they used to put their names in their poems. And so if you look at the verses for Lecha Dodi, they begin with the words Shamor, Shamor, Likrat, Mikdash, and the next one is Hina'ari. That's Shin Lamed Mem He. So that spells Shlomo for those of you keeping score at home. And then the next verses are Likrat, Likrat, Mikdash, Hitorari, Lo Tevoshi, Vehayu, and Yamin. That's He Lamed Vav Yud. That's Halevi, for those of you keeping score. So his name was Shlomo Halevi. And we know his last name was Alkabetz, because we actually know who wrote the poem. So we know what his last name was also. His name was Shlomo Alkabetz. And he lived in a little town in the north, in the Galilee, called Tzvat. And our students are going to go to the town called Tzvat. So the town of Tzvat became a very big city in the middle 1500s all of a sudden, and it was filled with mystics, Kabbalists, Jewish mystics. Why did the city grow at that particular time? Well, if you'll remember, in 1492, not only did Columbus sail the ocean blue, but the king and queen of Spain kicked the Jews out of Spain. The great expulsion of the Spanish community, Spanish Jewish community that had been here for centuries and was flourishing, were suddenly uprooted and destroyed, and they all had to flee. And that was devastating to the Jewish world. And fortunately for us at that time, the Ottoman Empire was rising, and the king of Turkey, the emperor of Turkey, welcomed the Jews into Turkey from Spain. And then it conquered the land of Israel. And so the Jews who had gone to Turkey now were able to go into Israel. And among the cities that they dwelled in was the town of Tzvat in the north. It was a big town. By the way, don't be too surprised when you see it. It doesn't look like such a big town today, but that's because cities today are ginormous. Back then, it was considered a big town. So they're all up there, right? And there was an idea in the Jewish world that the Messiah would come perhaps after something terrible happened. And so after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, for generations after that, the Jews were thinking, the Messiah is coming around the corner. And sure enough, Suleiman the Magnificent That's what he called himself. He was the Sultan of Turkey. Suleiman the Magnificent rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem at that time in the middle 1500s. So here's Jerusalem being rebuilt, and the Messiah is around the corner. And so along comes Shlomo Alkabetz, and he writes this song. Now, if you take a look at this song again, and you look at the first couple of verses, they're about Shabbat. Observe and remember, those are from the 10 Commandments about Shabbat. And then let us go out to greet Shabbat, sacred wellspring of blessing, conceived at the beginning of time, etc. Now look at the next few verses. Shrine of our sovereign royal city, rise up from the destruction and fear no more. End your dwelling in the tear-filled valley, for with God's compassion you will be upraised. Awake, rise up from the dust, dress yourself in the people's pride. By the hand of Jesse's son, that's King David, the Messiah, right, of Bethlehem's tribe, bring my redemption without further delay. Rouse yourself, for your lamp is lit. Let the flame rise up and glow. Awake, awake, utter songs of praise, for God's glory is revealed to your gate. Do not be embarrassed, do not be ashamed. Why are you downcast? Why are you mowing? The poorest of your people trust in this. The city will be rebuilt as in ancient days. Your despoilers shall be despoiled, your tormentors removed from far away. God and you will celebrate together, a bride and groom in joyful embrace. You will spread out to the left and the right, acclaiming Adonai is God, redeemed by the Zion of Peretz's line. That's again King David, right? And so the rest of the verses are all about the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Why? Because Shabbat in Jewish tradition is considered a taste of the Messianic era. We don't have to work, we can relax, we can study Torah, we can spend time with our family and friends. And in the Messianic era, that's going to be every day is like that. And so Alkabetz is writing not just about greeting the Sabbath day, he's writing about greeting the Messianic era in Jerusalem. And that's why it was written. And ever since it was written, thanks to the printing press, which was also invented at that time, Jews all over the world started singing this song. Just like we do today, just like Jews all over the world do today. So when you guys go to visit Tzfat, I hope you'll remember Lecha Dodi and the Sephardic mystic Jews who lived there and gave us this special Friday night service, Kabbalat Shabbat, that Jews have sung for centuries ever since that time. Now in a few minutes, Rabbi Strauss and Cantor Finkelstein are going to give you a special blessing, but I would like to conclude my remarks this evening with the words from Psalm 48. This psalm may well have been written after that stunning victory of King Hezekiah over the Assyrian siege of Jerusalem. It may well have been written for pilgrims just like you, coming to Jerusalem to see the amazing city that withstood the assault of a powerful empire. Here are the concluding verses from that psalm. Walk around Zion, circle it, count its towers, take note of its ramparts, go through its citadels, that you may recount it to a future age. For God is our God forever, and he will be our eternal guide. L'chula shalom, may you go in peace, and Shabbat shalom, may it be a Sabbath of peace.